You think you're angry at them because they wronged you. You think you're frustrated because they misunderstood you. You think you're reacting because they provoked you. But Carl Jung would tell you something darker. You're not angry at them. You're angry at the part of yourself you refuse to see. And the moment you blame them, you hand them your power. You make them the author of your emotional state. You give them control over your frame, and they don't even know it. Let me show you what that looks like. You're in a meeting. Someone criticizes your work in front of the team. You feel your chest tighten. You immediately defend yourself. You explain your reasoning. You justify your choices. You try to prove you're competent. And the entire time you think you're standing your ground, but you're not. You're operating inside their frame. They made a claim. You accepted the claim as worthy of response. You entered their courtroom. You put yourself on trial. And now you're the one scrambling for credibility while they sit back and watch. You didn't defend yourself. You submitted. All this. Your partner accuses you of being emotionally distant. You react. You list all the things you've done for them. You remind them of the time you stayed up late listening to their problems. You bring up last week when you planned that surprise. You're trying to prove you care. But the accusation wasn't really about care. It was about a frame. They positioned themselves as the judge of your emotional availability, and you accepted that position. You didn't question the frame. You didn't ask if their perception was accurate. You didn't hold your ground. You scrambled to meet their standard, and now they know. Their opinion controls your emotional state. That's not intimacy, that's submission. Here's another one. A friend makes a passive-aggressive comment about how you never have time for them anymore. You immediately feel guilty. You start explaining how busy you've been. You apologize. You promise to do better. But pause. Why did you accept guilt? Why did their dissatisfaction become your responsibility? Why did you step into the role of the person who must justify their choices? You handed them authority. You let them frame your time as something they have a right to evaluate. And now they know. If they want your attention, all they have to do is imply you're failing them. You gave them the remote control to your conscience. Carl Jung spent his career studying the shadow, the part of you that you deny, the traits you repress, the qualities you refuse to own, and he discovered something most people never accept. Every time you point a finger outward, you're revealing what you can't face inward. Every time you blame someone for being manipulative, you're avoiding your own capacity for manipulation. Every time you accuse someone of being cold, you're denying the coldness you're terrified to admit in yourself. Projection isn't just a psychological concept, it's a confession, and the people who project the loudest are the ones running the hardest from their own shadow. You were raised to believe that good people don't have dark traits. Good people aren't selfish. Good people aren't calculating. Good people don't withhold. Good people don't manipulate. So when those traits show up in you, you panic. You shove them into the basement of your psyche. You lock the door. You pretend they don't exist. And then you see them everywhere else. You see manipulation in your coworker's tone. You see coldness in your partner's silence. You see selfishness in your friend's boundaries. But it's not them. It's you. You're projecting your shadow onto everyone around you. And every time you do, you lose a piece of your power. Most of you won't finish this video. You'll feel uncomfortable. You'll tell yourself this doesn't apply to you. You'll click away and go back to blaming other people for your emotional reactions. That's fine. This isn't for everyone. This is for the few who are ready to stop pretending, the few who are willing to look at the game as it actually is, not as they wish it were. If you're still here, put your phone face down and listen, because what I'm about to show you will separate you from the herd permanently. Jung called it shadow integration. But let me translate that into something you can actually use. Every time you react emotionally to someone, you're being shown a part of yourself you haven't owned. Every time you feel the need to defend, explain, or justify yourself, you're operating in someone else's frame. And every time you blame someone for how you feel, you're admitting you don't control your own emotional state. That's not philosophy. That's the mechanism. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's the first shift. You think silence is avoidance. Jung would tell you silence is integration. When someone accuses you of something, your instinct is to respond immediately. You want to correct the record. You want to defend your character. You want to make sure they don't walk away with the wrong impression, but every word you say is a confession. You're confessing that their opinion matters. You're confessing that you need their approval. You're confessing that you're willing to enter their frame and argue your case. Silence does the opposite. Silence says, I don't need to defend myself to you. Silence says, your perception is not my responsibility. Silence says, I'm not playing this game. Let me show you what that looks like. Someone accuses you of being selfish. You don't explain. You don't justify. You don't list all the selfless things you've done. You just look at them. You let the silence sit. And in that silence, something happens. They start to feel uncomfortable. They begin to question their own accusation. They begin to wonder if they misjudged you. Because you didn't react. You didn't give them a response. You refused to step into their courtroom. And now they're the ones standing there alone, holding a claim that has no one to receive it. That's frame dominance. That's shadow integration. You didn't avoid the conflict. You refused to participate in a frame you didn't create. Here's the second shift. You think explaining yourself is clarity. Jung would tell you that explaining yourself is a form of submission. Every time you feel the need to explain your choices, your intentions, or your behavior, you're admitting that someone else's understanding is required for you to feel secure. You're acknowledging that their interpretation has authority over your reality. And the moment you admit that, you lose. Because now your internal state depends on their external validation. You need them to understand you. You need them to agree with you. You need them to see you the way you see yourself. And that need is a leash. Think about the last time you over-explained something. Maybe it was why you couldn't make it to an event. Perhaps it was why you made a particular decision. Maybe it was why you felt a certain way. You gave reasons. You gave context. You gave justification. But here's what you didn't notice. The more you explained, the weaker your position became. Because explanation implies doubt. Explanation suggests that your choice isn't self-evident. Explanation means that you need their agreement to feel okay about what you did. Strong people don't explain, they state, they decide, they move. And if someone doesn't understand, that's not their problem. That's the other person's problem. Here's the third shift. You think boundaries are walls. Jung would tell you boundaries are mirrors. Every time someone crosses a boundary, you think the problem is them. You think they're disrespectful. You think they're selfish. You think they don't care about you. But Jung would ask a different question. Why did you allow it? Why didn't you enforce the boundary the first time? Why did you give them a second chance? Why did you accept the apology behavior changer? The boundary wasn't crossed because they're bad. The boundary was crossed because you taught them it was optional, and now you're angry at them for learning the lesson you taught. Let me make this concrete. You tell someone you don't want to talk about a specific topic. They bring it up anyway. You feel uncomfortable, but you engage. You answer their questions. You participate in the conversation. And then later, you resent them for not respecting your boundary. But they didn't break your boundary. You did. You said one thing and did another. You communicated that your words don't match your actions. You taught them that your boundaries are negotiable, and now they know if they push, you'll fold. That's not their fault. That's yours. And until you own that, you'll keep attracting people who test your limits because your limits aren't real. They're suggestions. Here's the fourth shift. You think anger is strength. Jung would tell you anger is projection. When you get angry at someone, you think you're reacting to what they did, but you're not. You're reacting to what they reminded you of. You're responding to the part of yourself you can't accept. The person who makes you angriest is the one who reflects your shadow most clearly. The co-worker who you think is lazy reminds you of the laziness you won't admit in yourself. The partner whom you feel is controlling reminds you of the control you crave but won't own. The friend who you think is selfish reminds you of the selfishness you've been taught to suppress. Your anger isn't about them, it's about you. And the moment you realize that, your anger loses its grip. Think about someone you can't stand, someone who irritates you just by existing. Now ask yourself this: what trait do they have that you refuse to see in yourself? What quality do they express that you've been trained to repress? What behavior do they exhibit that you judge yourself for wanting? That's your shadow. That's the part of you that you blocked away because you were told it's not acceptable. And every time you see it in them, you feel rage. Not because they're wrong, but because they're free. They're expressing the thing you won't let yourself express, and that freedom is unbearable to you. So you call it a flaw, you call it toxic, you call it unacceptable. But really, you're just jealous. You're jealous that they're not controlled by the same fear you are. Here's the fifth shift. You think defending your character is necessary. Jung would tell you that protecting your character is a weakness. When someone questions your integrity, your competence, or your intentions, you feel the need to prove them wrong. You want to show them evidence. You want to provide receipts. You want to make sure they know you're not the person they think you are. But here's the trap. The moment you defend yourself, you validate their right to question you. You accept their position as judge. You enter their frame. You put your character on trial. And even if you win, you lose, because you showed them that their opinion matters enough for you to fight for it. Strong people don't defend their character. They let their actions speak. They allow time to reveal the truth. They don't need immediate validation. They don't need to be understood right now. They're comfortable with being misunderstood. They're comfortable with being misinterpreted because they know that people who matter will see the truth eventually, and people who don't matter don't deserve an explanation. That's not arrogance. That's confidence. That's frame control. You're not refusing to engage because you're guilty. You're refusing to engage because their judgment doesn't define you. Here's the sixth shift. You think seeking approval is a connection. Jung would tell you that seeking approval is self-abandonment. Every time you change your behavior to gain someone's approval, you're not connecting with them. You're disconnecting from yourself. You're saying that their perception of you is more important than your own integrity. You're saying that their comfort is more valuable than your authenticity. You're saying that being liked is more important than being real. And the moment you do that, you lose yourself. You become a reflection of what other people want. You become a performance. You become a people pleaser. And people pleasers are never respected. They're tolerated. Think about how often you edit yourself. How often do you soften your opinion because you're afraid of conflict? How often do you agree when you actually disagree? How frequently do you laugh at jokes you don't find funny? How is it that you pretend to care about things you don't care about? You think you're being polite. You think you're being agreeable. You think you're maintaining harmony. But you're not. You're erasing yourself. You're teaching people that the real you isn't acceptable. You're training them to expect a version of you that doesn't exist. And then you wonder why your relationships feel shallow. You wonder why people don't really know you. You wonder why you feel invisible. It's because you are. You've made yourself invisible. You've hidden behind agreeableness, and now no one knows who you actually are. Here's the seventh shift. You think reacting proves you care. Jung would tell you that responding proves you're controlled. Every time someone says something that triggers you, you think your reaction is justified. You think you're standing up for yourself. You think you're showing them they can't treat you that way. But you're not. You're showing them exactly how to control you. You're showing them that all they have to do is say the right words, and you'll lose your composure. You'll lose your frame. You'll lose your power. Your reaction is a confession. It's a confession that they got to you. It's a confession that you're not in control of your emotional state. It's a confession that you're easy to manipulate. Controlled people don't react. They respond. They pause, they assess, they decide if the situation is worth their energy, and most of the time it's not. Most of the time, the person trying to provoke you is operating from weakness. They're trying to pull you into their chaos because they can't handle their own. And if you react, you're playing their game. You're validating their strategy. You're giving them the response they wanted. But if you stay calm, remain silent, and refuse to engage, you flip the entire dynamic. Now they're the ones who look unstable. Now they're the ones who look desperate. Now they're the ones who lost frame. And you didn't have to say a word. Now let me show you what happens when you don't integrate this. When you keep projecting, when you keep blaming, when you keep reacting, you become invisible, not physically. Psychologically, people stop taking you seriously. They stop valuing your opinion. They stop respecting your boundaries because they've learned that you don't enforce them. They've learned that you react emotionally instead of responding strategically. They've learned that your frame is weak. And once they know that, you lose leverage, you lose authority, you lose respect. You become someone they manage, not someone they engage with. You become someone they tolerate, not someone they value. And the worst part is you won't even notice because you'll be too busy blaming them for how they treat you. But here's the other side. When you stop projecting, everything changes. When you own your shadow, you stop seeing enemies everywhere. When you stop defending yourself, people stop attacking you. When you stop seeking approval, people start seeking yours. Because you've shifted the frame, you're no longer playing their game. You're no longer operating in their reality. You're operating in yours. And people feel that. They think the difference is between someone who needs validation and someone who doesn't. They think the difference is between someone who reacts and someone who responds. They believe the difference is between someone who's controlled and someone who's in control, and they adjust accordingly. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. Jung understood something most people never learn. You don't become powerful by denying your darkness. You become powerful by integrating it. You don't become respected by being agreeable. You become respected by being real. You don't become free by blaming others. You become free by owning yourself, every part of yourself, even the parts you've been taught to hide, especially the parts you've been taught to hide, because those parts are where your power lives. Those are the parts where your leverage lives. Those are the parts where your frame lives. And the moment you stop running from them, you stop being controlled by the people who reflect them. So here's your challenge. The next time someone accuses you of something, don't defend yourself. Just observe. Observe your instinct to explain. Observe your need to be understood. Observe the discomfort of being misinterpreted. And sit with it. Let it exist. Let the silence do the work. The next time someone crosses a boundary, don't get angry. Don't explain why it's wrong. Just enforce. Remove access. Remove attention. Remove the opportunity for them to do it again. No explanation. No justification. Just action. The next time you feel the urge to seek approval, stop. Ask yourself whose approval you're seeking and why. Ask yourself what you're afraid will happen if you don't get it. And then do the thing anyway. Without permission, without validation, without applause. This isn't theory, this is fieldwork. This is how you reclaim your frame. This is how you stop being controlled by projection. This is how you integrate your shadow. And this is how you separate from people who only know how to operate through blame. If this connected with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more of this. But don't do it for me. Do it because you've decided to stop playing games you didn't design. If this hit you right, I am the strategist once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset change. You're not the person who reacts anymore. You're not the person who defends anymore. You're not the person who seeks permission anymore. You're the person who owns their shadow. You're the person who controls their frame. You're the strategist. And strategists don't get controlled. They observe. They decide. They move. That's who you are now.